All right, so there's also an entire class of values that also need to be considered. And all the possible ways that the user could provide us with bogus data. Just we're asking for a number and they give us a text, right? They use the wrong format for the dates, right? There's all sorts of things that could go wrong. That or maybe we deal with them with using some default values, but maybe those default values are okay for our algorithm, but they're not okay when we're going to store them in the database, right? So there's all sorts of bad data that also needs to be considered as a class on its own, right? That we need to make sure that our application can deal with it correctly. So, for instance, it's an entire equivalence class all by itself, where we might ask for numeric values, but text is being entered, and so we need to make sure that we take into account all these possible values and make sure that our application can handle it. So, for instance, for text field, you might need to check to see if it's numeric, or it has blanks, or it has some quotation marks in there that are not valid, or maybe some special characters, or maybe it's too long, too short, that has spaces in there that we're not expecting, that we might need to trim off, right? So we need to just exercise our application with all these classes of bad data. Or we were expecting numeric and they gave us text, right? And that or we are using English notation or European notation, using periods or commas or different ways of representing numbers, right? Or we were expecting things that were whole numbers, but they give us fractional numbers. So all these things we need to consider that oftentimes we don't, right? Because perhaps we are too focused or too biased with our own particular algorithm. We would rather perhaps have someone else that doesn't have the same biases to perhaps exercise our application. Or whether it's a currency that we need to do the conversion between currency. We're expecting dollars, but they give us euros, or the values were too small or too large or too many decimals or not enough decimals, or where we represent numbers differently, fractions with periods or commas, or dates in the wrong format. Where they might put years at the beginning or years at the end, or they might use slashes or dashes or periods. Or use wrong numbers for the months, or the wrong numbers for the weeks, wrong numbers for the days. They left it blank, or wrong separators. I mean, there's just quite a few things that we need to consider, right? Or maybe the date is too far in the future, right? Or too far in the past, right? Or credit cards that you have the wrong number of digits, that we can't figure out what the type of the card is because you don't have the right number there, or the security code is wrong, or you enter spaces, leading spaces. It's all plenty of things that we need to consider. Oftentimes, the way we typically deal with it is that we put in our algorithm some default values, right? If the values are left blank, or null or undefined, we typically write our algorithms to take on some default value, right? So that our algorithm doesn't blow up, right? With a null pointer exception or anything like that. With the intention, typically, that many of these fields will be filled out at some point, right? That when folks register and only provide their username and password, right? Our intention is that, or the algorithm's intention is typically is that at some point they will provide the first name and last name, right? At some later point, that because we like to be able to greet them when they come back to our application. Maybe we want to send them an email. We want to send them all sorts of correspondence, and we need their first name and last name, right? Oftentimes these things that we assume are defaults and don't break our application not necessarily means that it's behaving correctly or appropriately or its best quality. So we always have to have consider where the defaults are working, work well only at the beginning or going forward.